Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for joining us for Design Subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, March 18th, and this is session B of the BCDC Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues to host public meetings in a virtual format for health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. And I should introduce myself. I'm Diana Fernandez-Vivo, and I am the Deputy Chief of Urban Design at the City of Boston Planning Department and an ex officio member of this commission. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that commission staff are making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. And just for the record here, commissioners, I'm just going to read out names here. Commissioner Gilly Smith. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Present.
Commissioner Love.
Present.
Commissioner Lubanow.
Present.
Commissioner Kim.
Present.
Commissioner Manfredi.
Present.
Commissioner Ron.
Present.
Okay, fantastic. So for tonight's agenda, we will have two presentations for proposed projects associated with Phase 2 of the 776 Summer Street, South Boston project, and One Joslin Place in the Longwood Meadows area. Tonight's meetings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from the BCDC commissioners, and public testimony. So with that, Lizzie, do we have the presenters for the 776 summer team elevated to co-host?
Yes, everyone should be permitted. Please let me know if there's anyone that was missing.
So let's see, John Clarity, are you here?
Yep, I'm here, yep.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to read a summary really quick and then we'll hand it over to you guys.
Great.
So the 776 Summer Street Phase 2 project in South Boston is seeking Article 80B large project entitlements in accordance with an approved PDA master plan and Phase 2 development plan, which contemplated the development of 2 residential building blocks on Block A and B with associated parking and ground floor retail, a hotel and residential building on Block E, and the 1898 building with associated parking, amenities, and ground floor retail. A research and development building at Block C, associated with parking and ground floor retail, and site improvements, which include portions of the east of the Edison Plaza, formerly M Street Plaza, the public realm improvements of Summer Street, East First Street, Thomas Edison Way, and supporting Phase 2 infrastructure. This will be the second presentation of the Article 80B application for these proposed projects to the Design Subcommittee, following an introduction at the February 4th, 2025 public monthly meeting and subsequent Design Subcommittee, which occurred on February 18th. The most recent Design Subcommittee meeting focused on the shared public realm and urban form elements of all 4 proposed projects. This commission's meeting will focus on proposed projects at Block A and Block E. It is expected that at a future subcommittee meeting, we will focus on the proposed projects at Block B and Block C. It is my understanding also that Commissioner Mimi Love is present and has recused herself from deliberation. And I just want to make sure that there are no other commissioners who are present who intend to recuse. Okay, great. So the planning department will give presenters a 2-minute warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever they're ready.
Great, thanks, Diana, and good evening, commissioners. Kate, can you pull up the presentation, please? Awesome. I'm John Flaherty with HRP Group, and we appreciate the opportunity to be back in front of you for our second subcommittee meeting. Next slide. Today, we'll hear from the Block A architect Util, the Block E architect SCB, and the landscape architect Field Operations. Next slide. And as always, we like to start with a list of things we heard from you at prior meetings. If you want to jump ahead to the next slide. I won't go through each one of these, but big picture for today, as Diana mentioned, we will focus on the public realm and the ground floor improvements we've made since our last time together, as well as how Block A and E are working together at the important corner of Thomas Edison Way, and then get into some of the design specifics for both Block A and Block E. And also, as Diana mentioned, we will get to Block B and Block C and at a future meeting. Next slide, please. And as promised, we've created a physical model, which is currently available for viewing at City Hall. I don't know if any of you had a chance to get over there yet, but it is there, and we welcome you to go ahead and take a look. And with that, I will turn it over to Colin at Field Operations.
Thanks, John. Colin Curlew with Field Operations, Landscape Architects on the project. Just starting here with an orientation of our public realm in the context of Boston and particularly South Boston, filling in a missing link within the Harbor Walk and really connecting to some of the signature open spaces in South Boston, including Medal of Honor Park, Christopher Lee Playground, and then out to the Butler Memorial Park. Next slide. Just as a reminder as well, we're really looking at the site as kind of being comprised of these 4 different character zones. Summer Street Gateway being kind of the active retail frontage along Summer Street, the Waterfront Promenade being kind of more open and flexible programmable spaces along the waterfront, incorporating old industrial artifacts. The Turbine Precinct, which is really centered and anchored by the old turbine halls and Turbine Alley. At Edison Plaza, which will be the focus of a lot of what we're discussing today, being really that primary connection from the neighborhood down to the Waterfront Promenade. Next slide. So based on what we've heard and what John was mentioning earlier, a lot of the comments in the public realm we heard last time were focused on Edison Plaza, the service drive, and really that intersection of Thomas Edison Way where it turns and goes towards M Street. And so that's where we've really focused our attention. Next slide. This is the plan as it was presented prior. And next slide. What we've done is really look to address some of the feedback that we received. So beginning kind of from the north end or the left-hand side, looking at kind of creating more spaces and actually being more explicit about program. One of the things that we've done here is add a trellis that can help to kind of complement the overlook lawn with a flexibility of programming for movie screenings or yoga classes, things of that nature. Just to the west or page south of that, you can see a game alcove that we've introduced for scale that's showing regulation size shuffleboard, though it could be any number of different games. We've also looked at trying to kind of clarify the hierarchy of circulation. There was a comment about there being a lot of circulation, kind of relatively undifferentiated. So we've really kind of sought to reinforce that primary path, aligning with the crosswalk and leading you from the neighborhood down to the waterfront. The flexible seating area between blocks F and E, we've enclosed with planting to make it feel like it's much more of an enclosed kind of outdoor room rather than a space that's passed through. And then we focused a lot of our attention on that intersection of Thomas Edison Way. And while Block B isn't here this evening, a substantial shift that we've made in response to the comments we received is flipped the ground floor program, where previously retail had been along East First Street and residential amenity had been up against Thomas Edison Way. We feel that having retail at the corner there can help activate that corner of the public realm that we're showing as a dining terrace. And then the Block A team will speak more to how the building massing has been studied in regard to the comments about service drive and making it feel like it's not a place for pedestrians to continue. From a ground floor, ground plane perspective, what we've looked at here is continuing the concrete sidewalk across Thomas Edison Way as a raised crossing signaling to vehicles that pedestrians are prioritized there and creating a threshold across which one might need to travel to get to the service drive beyond. And then over to the right-hand side there, up against Block A, what we've done is narrow that pathway out and angle it towards the building and an egress door. There are some other building massing responses that Block A will share, but the idea there to make that streetscape feel less like a sidewalk that's continuing, and to make clear that there's not a destination at the end of that path. And with that, I'll pass it over to Block A.
Hi, thanks. Next slide, please. Just reminding everybody again where Block A is. It holds the southeast corner and plays an important role relative to the open spaces within the project, but the park across the street and the long linear Thomas Butler Way that runs all the way to Pleasure Beach and Castle Island. So a lot of things we've been considering here. Next, please. This is the ground floor plan and the landscape proposal. The last time we met with you, Colin's already covered some of the things that we've done, but I think the big takeaway from our last session with the BCDC was the ambiguity about the role of Service Drive as a street or a drive relative to the major move of the public realm really taking a right and moving south toward the existing neighborhood and downplaying Service Drive as especially a pedestrian destination, not inviting people to the end of Service Drive, which is then mostly a service court. Next. So this is a before and after of that same ground plane in the context of the ground floor plan that Colin discussed. In addition to the ground plane changes, which have de-emphasized the sidewalk, which really now leads to what will be a parking entrance so that people can still find that. We've adjusted the mass of the north wing of the building, which will be much clearer when I show you three-dimensional drawings of the adjustments that we made. Otherwise, the ground floor uses are the same. We've got the retail on the neighborhood side because the park is such an important piece of the larger puzzle. We've got the amenities on the northwest corner. We've got bike parking facing the dog park and the driveway where the MBTA buses access their drive. And then we've moved parking and loading on the far end where the streetscape changes, and that really functions more again as a service court beyond the landscape zone that Colin talked about. Next. This is just a blow up of the landscape changes and a hint of the massing changes that you'll see. You'll see that the alignment of the building changes to signify where there's active edges in the building, more glazing with the service end further east. Next slide. To remind you, our essential moves from a massing standpoint were to take what's a C-shaped podium building and break down the mass into 3 volumes, a longer one on the north side facing building F, which is a lab building, a shorter mass designated by number 2 that relates to the planned moves in Block B, and then a mass that's actually aligned with the street grid along East First Street, which is much more about the cadence of existing facades that happen both on the project side of East First Street, but also the existing buildings on the south side of East First Street. And to further differentiate the facades, the parapet of volume 2 is taller than the parapet of volumes 1 and 3, just to put a punctuation on the way that we're articulating those volumes. Next. One of the outcomes of the feedback we got from the BCDC relative to thinking about Service Drive and the messaging was to go back and reconsider the massing again, the decisions about the massing. The original massing that we had is diagrammed in alternative number 1 to give the punchline away. That's still our preferred massing to keep the alignment of the volume on First Street on the street grid, but have that rotation, which has a couple of advantages I'll describe in a minute. We did try straightening out that northern wing, but we thought that compelled the perspective much more down Service Drive by opening up more view of the sky from a perspectival standpoint. And then we tried making the volume along that segment of Thomas Edison Way that connects to the neighborhood, the long bar, but we didn't like the scale of that massing relative to what's happening on Block B and the kind of presentation of that. So next slide, please. What we decided to do instead was to break down the scale of that volume along Service Drive in two ways, among other things we studied. The first thing we studied was rotating the geometry of the facade back to the street grid beyond the fire stair to turn away the face of the building, signaling where the service court is versus a kind of the lusher landscape of the Service Drive closer to the park sequence that Colin talked about. But we also thought that, and these aren't the final schemes, that we might play up the actual northwest corner of the building by making those balconies a little bit more demonstrative in a way to guide the eye around the corner. If you're coming down in this perspective, and I have more perspectives to show, that would in a way guide the eye around the corner and lead you out to the neighborhood. So the scheme that I'm going to show you is a combo platter of those two strategies. So next slide, please. This is what you saw last time. I'm now teeing up with all of those perspectives, a kind of before and after. You see the alignment of that rotation actually even working pretty well, we think, in this important stage set-like view that you get from within the Turbine Hall building, looking at the kind of urban scene that we've made. We came back to liking that rotation. And then next slide, the consequences of both, and these are simple line drawings, rotating that volume out where the service functions are to kind of slow down the speed of the perspective at the end and terminate it, but also to take our existing vocabulary of corner balconies at the end of each of the volumes and make that one more expressive by having each alternating balcony cantilever out from the volume a little bit, a kind of urban dovetail joint. And that also keeps those two balcony extensions not under the one above too. We have some renderings later to kind of explain what that looks and feels like in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. So the primary massing moves are really focused on that longer volume on the north side that faces the Block F lab. In terms of materiality, we're looking for.
Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I just want to let you know that we've got 2 minutes left.
Okay. We looked for the kind of palette from the existing neighborhood, which is quite diverse. Next. This is a diagram rendering of how those colors will be deployed. A sand tone on the north side, partly because it captures shadow better, a kind of iron spot in that middle volume, which is where the entrance is located, and then a kind of cinnamon color that we're thinking of for East First Street, but also that end volume of the north facade. These are some details of that rendered next. And then more importantly, some perspectives looking into the project from the neighborhood, and then that corner we fussed with where the balconies are, where Thomas Edison turns. So that concludes Block A. I'll turn it over to Kristen, I think is going to speak for Block E, correct?
Yes. Hi, Kristen O'Gorman with SCB. So to start us off, I thought I'd quickly run through how we got to the massing that we have landed on today, starting with a simple mass of program in step 1, and then step 2, the important move is really adding this kink in the mass. And what this does is it helps direct views away from Block F across the plaza, but it also provides a wider entry to Thomas Edison Plaza from the South Boston side, but also from the waterfront side. And then last, what it does is it helps provide a little bit more breathing room between our new structure in 1898 to help preserve some of the aspects of that building that we're interested in keeping. Then next, we really wanted to focus on the street wall and the urban realm. And so what we've done is we've created a notch that aligns with the height of 1898 to create that continuous street wall height and help to break down the scale of the building. And then finally, just continuing to study and further redefine the mass moving up the building and creating 3 tiers within that mass. Next. Just a quick section to talk about stacking here. Hotel at the bottom with residential. We are capped with the FAA heights at the top of the building, which we are staying well with under, and then also meeting the raising the first floor to meet the design flood elevation. You can move to the next. So next we wanted to talk a little bit about the circulation, building off of what Colin was talking about, but a little more closely to this building specifically. And to note, we do have contours listed on here, so it can help describe some of the grade changes across the property. But the thick line at the top of the page that runs diagonally is really the primary path to the waterfront. So this is the main pedestrian artery for people moving from the South Boston side. And so what we're doing there is having that as our main connection, and then having people branch off of that to reach the entry to both the residential and the hotel. When people move from turbine side, they will come up that set of stairs that you see, along with that sloped walk that will lead you directly towards the entries. You're starting to see some of the scale of this drop-off zone. We're providing about 10 to 15 feet clear along the building and a 22-foot wide drive aisle so that cars can comfortably park, unload, while others can pass. Next. And then just starting to express the scale and section with a comfortable 18-foot height, and then using these columns that are coming down at the building to help separate people zones from vehicle zones. And then furthermore, on scale, it's always helpful to reference something locally that's built that folks might be familiar with. This is the Four Seasons. And just for comparison, they have about an 8-foot wide sidewalk along the building, a 16-foot width for the cars, and then a 40-foot length of their drop-off zone. So we're already talked about our width for the sidewalk and drop off, but we're also hitting 72 feet so that there wouldn't be an issue with queuing of cars. Now we're going to walk around and start to look at this from a 3D perspective. This is from the turbine hall side. So what you can see here is some of that portico drop off realized 3-dimensionally, but also to note once again that notch at the height of 1898. This is from that crosswalk. I think this perspective really helps to show the hierarchy of that path. So people will move across here, and we're starting to define entries with canopies. And so just help pull people into that zone to find the entry to both the residential and the hotel. This is from the vehicular entry. So though materials are not yet finalized by any means, we're looking at changing the paving material to really help signify to cars that this is a shared space. And then similarly, what we've done from a design element is study the core. Originally, the core was coming down along the exterior of that setback of the ground floor, creating an opaque wall, but we've worked hard to shift that back, provide program, and maximize the transparency at the ground floor here. This is just a quick view of those stairs and that sloped sidewalk. Moving towards the plaza, once again, we're starting to define those entries and help pull people in, and really are excited about how we are engaging the plaza. And then similarly to note here is that we're carrying that notch from the 1898 also on this facade to further break down the scale facing the park. Just to remind everyone of some of our inspiration, we've always felt it was important to represent the innovation that occurred inside this building, and specifically the turbines. So starting to look at how that starts to take shape with, fluid and aerodynamic shapes. And then while we're still, once again, working through exact materiality, we do feel strongly that this should be a metallic expression. So now we're studying different tones of that, potential gradients, to see what feels appropriate. So what we heard last time was that there was an opportunity for this to really become more of an icon for the site or for the development. And so we've studied tirelessly many options to see, what would create a more impactful and cohesive expression. So on the left is where we were in February. There were many moves from a Part T standpoint that we felt were strong, with the rounded continuous corner to really help anchor and define Thomas Edison Way and Thomas Edison Plaza. Once again, that notch towards 1898. But we really wanted to simplify the approach of the facade. Once again, we thought that would be a more impactful expression for this building overall. And as you step a little bit towards Block F and you start to realize that kink in the building, we think that this angled mass really starts to create these shifting facade expressions with this new articulation. And then also just highlighting that we're maximizing the height of the building on the south side where this corner is. We are able to add more height because of the flight path, but really it's helping to emphasize and ground this corner and show importance, but then also creating a dynamic sky plane of the building that you'll be able to perceive from afar. From the waterfront side, we're beginning to echo that rounded corner facing back towards the waterfront and towards the city, because we also recognize this as a very important perspective as well. So now you're starting to see how it fits into the skyline of the development and then a bit of the approach on the Summer Street Bridge.
Thanks, Kristen. Diana, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you so much. And we'll turn it over to the commissioners for their comments.
Can start from a landscape perspective if others aren't chomping at the bit. Colin, so thank you for the presentation, everyone. It was very helpful, and thank you for being responsive to, to the comments that we had the last time. Could we go to the landscape, the more recent landscape plan? So Colin, I very much appreciate the spatialization of a number of the plaza spaces. I think one of the last, as you noted, one of the comments from last time was that it felt like it was more circulation spaces. So I very much like the addition of the trellis and the definition of the pockets within the area. And I do think actually I'm a little sort of on the fence about the approach along the service drive, because it is actually the raising. I think that's actually very effective, but the direct line to the to the loading dock service stair, as I said, I'm on the fence about it. If it's more direct rather than I know it's not parallel, but it is a straight shot, but as I said, I'm on the fence about that. I think one of the things that this plan really raises to me, and it's something that in a further iteration when we're looking at other buildings, I think it would be helpful to understand the overall paving strategy. Because, for example, since we're not talking about block F, that gives a good opportunity for you to define that, because that's a lot of open space that feels quite differentiated. So I think just understanding how much of it is concrete, what are the other materials, how do you bring more of a human scale? And even if we're not going to be designing every aspect of this project at this stage, just starting to understand more about that more sort of tactile, experiential scale of the landscape to give us cues of how it's going to be developed. I do think that from an open space perspective, there's a couple of big questions that I still have. The first was from the video that we saw the last subcommittee through the turbine hall towards the carport. And it was quite a jarring view from the last, not from today's presentation, but from the last video presentation. So I would like to understand what that view looks like as well, which is also the sort of the correspondent view. As soon as you clear the turbine hall, looking in the direction, looking plan north, what is the view of the carport area from, from that perspective? Along Thomas Edison Way. So the passageway through Turbine Hall, and then just as you step out beyond it, looking towards exactly that perspective. And then the other thing that is less clear to me is what the character of this quite large hotel plaza is on, on the left of the hotel on the plan just by to the left. No, go to the left. Exactly that plaza, because again, it's quite large when, when I recall the scale from your views of how large that green lawn is at the top, that plaza is about the same scale. And so trying to get a sense of what the character of it is, if that's something that's going to be designed by this team or designed by the hotel operations, if it's public or private. I think it's public space. So trying to get a better sense of what that is. It's in the same sort of bucket as the big stripe along Block F. But overall, I really do appreciate the thinking about the different spaces as the project's being developed. It's getting richer. There's a number of really beautiful moments on this project, and each time we see it, it gets more intentional and distinctive, each area.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I just want to thank you for the presentation. I realize this is what I've seen presentations of previous proposals. This is my first time seeing this specific one. I want to piggyback on Shauna's comments, but translate them or address them in terms of the architecture. That one of the things, I had the opportunity to tour this site when we were, BCDC looked at a previous developer's proposal, and I was really struck by how much this site is distinguished by the historic character, its proximity to the waterfront, the opportunity to kind of mitigate between the small scale residential neighborhood to reconnect it to the waterfront. And it just seems like a pretty extraordinary opportunity. But when I look at this proposal, I am struggling to kind of see that character expressed in this proposal. So just as Shauna questioned sort of what's the overall paving strategy, I'd like to understand what's the overall strategy to the architecture. How do you create how do you allow each building to respond to its own individual conditions while also providing some continuity? How does this create an ensemble? I'm also looking for the human scale and that tactile experiential quality. Again, that's something that I really associate with this district, and the buildings that are presented today remind me of more of a corporate environment of buildings that we've seen in other developments across the city. And I understand the rationale for the kinks in the buildings, but I wonder really how that translates in an experiential quality. And I would just really like to better understand the expression of the identity. We see a lot of glass and metal buildings and when we review projects, and I can't help but wonder, how that translates to the experience of the pedestrian. How does that relate to the surrounding context? So again, how do we think about the overall character of this district in both a kind of a broader sense of the overall development and then the individual buildings? I also am kind of struggling a little bit with the rationale for the kinking of the residential building because it seems contradictory to the idea of, how do you guide people's views from the neighborhood to the waterfront? So, sorry, I have more questions actually than specific comments at this point, since this is my first time. Thank you.
I'll go next. And I'm going to go to block A. And Tim, I'm going to ask you to put up, I should have written down the number, but I didn't. The page that had your, I think on one page you had 3 adjacent elevations.
Right.
And it had to do with color.
Yeah.
And yes, that's the one. Thank you. So I'm intrigued by this. I think I understand what you're doing, what you're trying to do here in terms of creating 3 separate parts, distinguished by color, texture, and to a certain extent the regularity of grid versus the irregularity versus that translates or makes legible interior, exterior. This is always a hard thing to do, and I think you're doing it well, but I wonder. Where do you, I want to hear you a little more to talk about what exactly, I know you're trying to make scale, you're trying to break down into 3 parts, and maybe you're trying to get at a little bit of what Anne Marie just said about translation across East First in that scale making. I'm wondering about how these pieces will come together. And where you think you are in this process of making one building that has 3 distinct parts.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. There's a good set of questions because I think they're the same questions that Anne Marie is raising. I think, I think backing way up, I don't want to answer the question for all of the architects, but global capital likes their buildings big. We don't build little townhouses and things. And, this is, as any architect that works on this scale of development knows, there's a fine line between artificially breaking down the scale of a large building using an approach that's more Disney-like versus making decisions that still have architectural integrity. And I think, David, you're sort of getting at that, but it might help to describe the rule sets we used to create the similarity and differences, because our goal is to be on the knife edge there. For example, the north volume, which faces building F, and volume 1 that faces the park, use essentially the same fenestration language, which is the fenestration is free range chicken relative to the distribution of the units behind. So bedroom units are smaller, living room windows are bigger, all within that 30% or less, so that this can be passive house. And so the percentage of glass is actually low on this building. And then the middle volume, which has the entry, we call it the iron spot volume, has the same windows like many commercial and pre-war residential and commercial buildings that weren't honest functionalist. And that decision was made relative to setting up the architecture for the entry too, that's in a way, the more formal side of the building, because it's where the entry is, it faces block B. And so those are the rule sets we used for 2 different fenestration strategies to create enough of a difference that we were breaking down the scale of the building from an urban design standpoint. And then in terms of the coloration, those decisions are a little bit being driven by shade and shadow studies. Having the lighter tone on the mass that faces north to get most credit for our balcony move at that very important urban design corner by not having that cladding be too dark. And then you'll see too that the base designs for each of the 3 volumes are different. They're 1 story facing East First Street and facing north, and it's 2 stories facing Thomas Edison Way. And then that whole ground floor is going to be a combination of brick and precast concrete with a lot of detail. So in terms of the articulation of the building, that detail is going to be expressive, textured, and really signal more that this is a residential building than a commercial building in terms of those decisions we make. Because in fact, the legibility of this as a residential building, both as a mass when you're standing back, but also at that kind of sidewalk scale, is important to us. So it's hard to see in these drawings because they're back a little bit, and because we haven't fully resolved with the client team exactly what those details are. That's the logic there. So, and then we're using different textures of panelized systems. You can see hints of that with different kinds of corrugation and things to approximate that same detail above. So that's the didactic explanation of some of those decisions that we're making. And if you go 2 slides forward, you can see the manifestation of that, even slight changes in plane to get some shadow effects with a slight reading of verticals and the spandrels through shadow decisions. We're in at that level of detail yet already. And the way that at the end of each of the volumes, those corner balconies in a way highlight the connections between the volumes. So those are all of the considerations. We can't have balconies face the port, which is the east end, which I think John or somebody was just pointing to. But that's the rationale for the moves. But the fenestration in a way is driven by the distribution of the rooms behind.
Yeah, what I really do appreciate, and I think you're doing very well here, is there is a restraint around the use of materials, which in so much of this genre, the 7-story residential building, I think there's an overuse, opening up the suites catalog to date myself, and using too many materials. You're making the distinctions in color and texture, but then you're being consistent within the piece, which I really appreciate. I was a little bit surprised when you talked about, I think you just said corrugated metal, but that's a detail.
Yeah, I think it's corrugation as a texture, not as a. If I added metal to that we're not ready to fully understand that. But I think you're right. If you look at this scale of apartment building in the city, it's a kind of AB of bays and different materials at a middle ground of scale. And so the integrity of the building as a mass is lost. And I think we're pulling back the lens and saying a little bit. And if you look at pre-war apartment buildings in Boston or New York, each of those volumes and the level of detail is the level of detail that those buildings would have. So there's a decision to go from detail to mass instead of the kind of middle ground of busy bays and kind of the material palette sample board that seems to be very popular these days.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think one of the real keys, and you see it here, especially on that in the drawing on the right, the seam between the parts will be very important. And I'm sure you'll handle that well. I have to say, let's go back to, I don't know, any one of your, I guess your ground floor plan. I remain a little unconvinced about the rotation on the service drive. In a way, I see it almost as an invitation as opposed to the narrowing of the perspective. I suppose you can argue that one either way, but when I see Thomas Edison Way and the way it rotates to East First, that's an invitation. Obviously, there's water beyond, and there's the continuous walkway that's very strong. I still remain a little unconvinced that there's a seam that runs north-south where you twist that massing, and I know from the way you presented with your preference and your alternatives that you're you're very attached to that. I'm not. I guess I'm still a little bit unconvinced that that's
there's a little bit
strongest.
there's a little bit of an inside out interest too, that it makes those units just a little bit better not to be completely at right angles to a future lab building. The kind of
Okay,
rotating
yeah.
away.
Yeah.
You know, it can be
Fair.
challenging to live across from a research lab where, you know, and so we thought that by pulling the mass back into alignment where the surface drive would slow the eye, and signal a very different treatment where that I think I used the analogy last time that the surface drive is a little bit like the dead end of the streets in the seaport, like at Pier 4 and those buildings along that inlet, where the streets kind of dissolve into kind of shared space, almost kind of attractively landscaped service courts. And that's really what's happening on the business end, because it's across from the parking entrance to building F too.
Right.
But
Right.
if you go back, whoever's driving, to the very early diagrams of the different alignment studies that we did, it's like the third slide in our sequence. The next one. Yes, this one. You're really talking about alternative number 2.
Right.
And we got very nervous about that parallelism relative to what it does to the figure ground of the whole park, the kind of north-south park alignment that Colin was talking about, but just the proximity of the building then to the lab building in the future.
Yeah, I understand. You're right. I am talking about alternate number 2.
Yeah.
But understand your goal of creating a kind of not a termination, but the definition of Thomas Edison, that Thomas Edison is actually turning. This is shrinking in size, both at street level and building massing, and
the rotation also sets up a kind of 3/4 perspectival view of the end of Block A, which makes it a little bit more object-like. And I think it does a better job in the sequence of perspectives approaching it. Draw your attention more to the corner than the long perspective. If you go 2 slides or 3 slides forward, not this one, but the next one, you know, as you're approaching it, that kick in the perspective really sets the eye on the 100% corner there, and not the kind of long facade running back. But I see your perspective too. I mean, I just we've been studying this 5,000 different ways, so your fresh perspectives are useful.
And I appreciate the alternatives. Sorry, Dan.
And David, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but one thing I wanted to share as well is that from planning department staff, I think some of the feedback we had shared with the team was that, you know, we were thinking about these sort of broader view sheds, and specifically the portal sort of, you know, going through the historic 1898 building as being this really important moment where we had that facade just you know, a sort of parallel line to the lab building. It felt really flat as a terminus to the composition of the entire, you know, how you're going to experience this at the ground level. So I really do welcome the commissioners to come to City Hall and see the model, because we only kind of picked up on that by seeing the three-dimensional model and getting a sense of, like, you know, how are you going to be navigating as a pedestrian this space, and what are the moments, right, that terminate your experience of Thomas Edison Way, and how do we want the architecture to both hold that corner, and also, you know, have some sort of interest or terminus to that sort of back end, that, you know, provides that visual variety, right, that we all enjoy as
That's a great point. I'll try to come see that. And the model's in the model room? I'm sorry, Diane, is that where the model
so
is?
we do have the model. It's currently sitting in Seth's office, but we're happy to move it
okay.
into the model room.
Okay.
They did a sort of genius little move here. They made it a little lazy Susan model, so it's very easy to spin around.
I saw that. Yeah,
the
that's very cool.
model.
Just one more quick comment. I think we were all so taken with your walk around the site last time we saw you, the pedestrian walk around the site, on this, just staying on the sidewalks and walking around was really, really, really helpful. I'm going to suggest when we come to our conclusions that when you come back with the next two buildings, that would be a great way to see everything again, up to date. I'll stop, and I know we have others. I don't know if we've lost Bill.
And David, I just want to make one last point too, and I think Anne Marie, this is to your comment around kind of the historical identity, right, of the neighborhood and some of these features. And I think I want to hold that comment, because I feel like we need to see the other buildings in the context of the two buildings we were reviewing today, because there are some elements of preservation here that are being held to, right? And I think there's a sort of question around, do we pick up on the, you know, I think there are moments where we pick up on the materiality, I think, with some of these residential buildings. There's some detailing also in Block E and other blocks here that I think really speak to that. But I think there is a sort of like juxtaposition here between the sort of historic preserved element and specifically the hotel building, right? And what the material expression should be there. So that's something that I think it's a worthy point. We've been thinking about it as well. We're just trying to think about the balance between all these elements.
And I think too, if I could just chime in, I put in the chat, as Tim and David were talking about the approach to the building A, I think there's, you know, it prompted the question for me is sort of, where's the building entrance? Because if you are, and I really appreciate the efforts to address breaking down the scale, you know, not making the design overly complicated, but I do feel like there's a little bit of a inherent conflict when you have one sort of big entrance to the complex, but then the buildings read as three individual buildings. So I started looking at the plans thinking, oh, are there three separate entrances? I think there's maybe some mediation between maybe at the base, or is there some way with keeping the simplicity and the elegance of the design that, again, maybe strives for a little bit of unity between the three without introducing a new material.
We, just to answer your question, it might be good to point out where the entrance is. If you go to the last couple of slides, maybe the last perspectives, it's where Stan meets Iron Spot, and it's a 2-story entry. It's probably best in the elevation on slide 24.
Yeah, I see that in the elevation. I have to say, when I look at it from the perspective, it's not intuitive to me that that's where it would be. There's something very contradictory to it. So I think that's, again, I appreciate all the work you've been doing to the explanation, the rationale, but I would expect three separate entrances and not sort of one large entrance, which actually I think might help you if you begin to think about, you know, what are some opportunities to unify these while also, you know, taking the approach that you've had?
Well, we're gonna have a retail entrance. We are gonna have different entrances to the building. It just won't be the residential entrance. It's not,
I
yeah,
see that. Yeah,
yeah,
I understand that. Thank you.
yeah.
This is Bill. I have my hand raised, but someone may be ahead of me.
I don't think so, Bill. You should go
Okay.
for it.
So let me ask a question. I appreciate the presentation today, and I've long enjoyed the development of this project. That said, Building E, my question is about Building E. Historically, Building E was a narrow rectangle. The long part of the rectangle was running north-south, the narrow part east-west, if I've got my coordinates correct. And it meant that when you were within the community, you saw this tower, yes, but it was a kind of narrower piece, and it gave a kind of liveliness to the view looking north, ultimately to the water. Of course, 2 or 3 times meetings ago, we saw you bring the cant, I'll call it the cant, into the shaping of that building. And I thought that kept the building, made the building feel looser and less fixed, shall we say. And I thought that was a good thing. In one of your slides tonight, you showed looking from the southeast at the corner of that building, and it feels like the narrowness of it has been lost, that it's become significantly wider, and therefore I worry that's significantly chunkier. Yes, there we go.
Mhm.
So on the right, that even in this comparison, the rendering on the left looks taller and narrower than the rendering on the right. I may be wrong, and I'm going to ask you if I am, but I'm a little worried that the building has gotten significantly more chunky uh, uh, from this view, which is, of course, the view of the project from South Boston. So,
Sure. I can jump in if this is a good time. It has not it hasn't changed dimensions. So I think it's just a play with perspective. On the left, we had corner balconies that face towards the 1898. So that might be what you're perceiving as more of a void to make it look a little more narrower. But the overall width is the same as what we had last time.
I would think maybe then the difference is that the earlier rendering had a lot more verticality to the drawing, and it may be these indentations in the building at the 3 points they occur is making the building look slightly squatter. So I would observe then that, at least from my perspective, the rendering on the right still feels chunkier. And is there something that you can adjust to alleviate that or not? You may not want to. So hearing you talk about your company's fascination with big buildings, I just was worried that this chunkiness was something that you were wanting to do.
No, chunkiness is not a goal. So we definitely want to further study that. I think one of the other massing moves that happened between these two is we really tried to highlight different tiers moving up the building. So it actually fans out ever so slightly as you move up. And so that's actually probably what you're perceiving. So it's not actually wider, it's just the perspective of this building and how you're catching it that you're going to catch the building getting a little deeper at the upper levels. So lengthwise, it's getting longer towards us, if that makes sense.
So let me ask, because this came up in buildings, ABC, C and D in the last meeting, where some of us were worried that there was many too times when the upper parts of the building cantilevered out beyond the lower parts and made the buildings again seem heavier. So are you telling me in this rendering we're looking at that the upper quartile of the building is actually extending beyond the middle quartile and beyond the lower quartiles?
Yes.
And what's the reason for that?
So we thought it'd be interesting to start to catch, and it's not a deep cantilever, and I am forgetting the exact depth. It's a couple feet, but to just catch that underside to help define different tiers moving up the building, because we too were very excited about the verticality. And I think on a few pages back, you see the thousands, and that's not even half of what we've studied. And we've always wanted to express this because this is the most slender and the tallest building on this site. So we really wanted to celebrate that. But we thought it'd be interesting to start to break it up as you approach the building to catch the bottom of those buildings, and then change the edge where it terminates towards 1898. Once again, this is going back to that inspiration of the turbine, that this is really that rotor that holds the structure, and then the blades fan out. So it was this movement of, and once again, we wanted to simplify the move. So we made 3, but to have these kind of movements fan out to really help strengthen the corner, that sharp corner or rounded corner, but that clean corner that comes down the building to really anchor it. So that was an approach that we took to help.
But you would acknowledge that it makes the building seem a little heavier.
I think from this perspective, I can see that comment. Truthfully, I didn't really notice it reading that way. I think sometimes when you're so close to it, you don't see that. But as you move around and if you looked at it more straight on, it's not actually wider.
Okay, well, that is something that concerns me. It may be a detail, but it's the tallest building on the campus, and it would be too bad if it made the feeling of the composition heavier.
Certainly, we do not want that.
Okay, I agree.
I actually wondered, to Bill's comment, and you showed us very quickly 30 different versions of this. Maybe there was more.
Yeah, much more.
Yeah. But I like your rotor metaphor, the movement of the building. I wonder, to Bill's comment, if it rotated the other way, instead of rotating out, it rotated in this view. And I know it would be different from different views, but that's just occurred to me as Bill was speaking.
And I wonder that also, given the explanation we just heard.
Yeah, from this view anyway, which is so important because it's the view from first, it would make you would see more sky. It would make the building feel slenderer.
Great. So David, I know we've got a packed agenda today, and
Yes.
this is a really meaty discussion. So I wonder if you could help wrap us up with sort of like
Sure.
concrete next steps and feedback for the team. And then we can transition to public comment and our next project.
Yeah, let me try to do that. I heard several requests from commissioners when you come back to see us, and I'll try to hit them as requests for your return. One, the broadest, is a kind of explanation or maybe even diagram of the strategy of the architecture that Anne Marie articulated. And I guess that's not That's not to say that it's, well, I don't want to speak for her, but in a diagrammatic way to understand that kind of holistically across the site now that will have seen all the buildings. A great comment from Shauna, but more about the paving strategy for the ground plane. There's two is number, and maybe I may have left something out from you, Shauna. Number three, Bill's comment about the apparent width and maybe even ascending width, meaning getting wider as it gets taller, at least from this view. And then I'm going to say lastly, my request that we get that wonderful walk around the site again at a pedestrian level, that animation, which was really, really very helpful. And I think, by the way, that maybe some of our comments on that actually affected some of the pieces here. Did I leave anything out, fellow commissioners?
The only thing which I think will be solved with the walk around is really that view coming through the turbine hall passage and seeing the experience of the carport, because I'm a little bit worried about that.
And David, your comment about building A, just the continued questioning, which I would agree with, the kind of angling of the building, and then just also sort of defining the entrance, so resolving.
Yes.
This goes back to the question of kind of what's the language of continuity among, both an individual building like building A and then throughout the development.
Okay, Lizzie, I'm sure you've got all that. Should we see if we have any comments from our neighbors?
At this point, we are going to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute to public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. I don't think we have any hands, so I think that concludes the public comment period. Thank you so much to the 776 summer team. And with that, we're going to transition to our next team. So we just want to make sure that Michael and Kevin are elevated, Lizzie. But while we do that, I'm going to go ahead and just say a couple remarks as it relates to the project. So One Joslin Place is located in the Longwood Medical area and is a proposed project that contemplates the development of 495,000 square feet of hospital use and 250 parking spaces in a single building on approximately a 1-acre site in accordance with their approved 10-year institutional master plan for BIDMC and Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. This will be the second presentation of the Article 80B application for this proposed project to the design committee, following an introduction at the December 3rd subcommittee full commission in 2024 and a subsequent design committee meeting on January 21st. The most recent design subcommittee focused on the immediate public realm elements and proposed pedestrian bridges. And this subcommittee will focus on the architectural expression of the proposed building. It is expected that a future design subcommittee will focus on broader public realm interventions, including adjacent public right-of-ways, Joslin Park, and updates to the proposed pedestrian bridges. And it is my understanding that Commissioner Kim has recused herself from deliberation. And at this moment, I just want to make sure that there are no other commissioners who intend to recuse. Okay, hearing none. So a reminder to the proponent teams that you have 15 minutes to present. We'll give you a 2-minute warning. And with that, I invite Michael and Kevin to present.
Diana, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Hinchcliffe with Payette, joined by my colleague Kevin Sullivan. Thank you to the commissioners for your time this evening to talk about the future cancer hospital or One Joslin Place. This evening, we will be discussing with you the building architecture, as Diana said. For orientation purposes, again, we are at the critical nexus between the Dana-Farber campus and the Beth Israel Deaconess East and West campus, the site of this incredible collaboration to bring a dedicated hospital for cancer care to our city and to the region. We presented this to you as with the last time for the building as an overall orientation to the project back in December. We heard some commentary from you that the building needed to be have more studies in terms of its scale and its articulation. We needed to look at the urban realm, particularly the ground floor, but that the exuberance of the architecture and the expression that we were achieving of the program use was laudable. As Diana said in our last subcommittee meeting in January, we reviewed the connectors in the public realm. We got tons of great comments from the commissioners and are continuing to work with the city staff and the proponents to bring revised information and materials to you soon. I do want to note as well that last night we had a task force meeting where we reviewed the project progress with the abutters and task force members, and the project was incredibly well received in terms of its expression, its materiality, its fit within the neighborhood from their perspective as abutters and residents and those that are in the district every day. But we did hear some comments that when we return to you, additional study is needed to conform and coordinate with the city and the MBTA. But let's get into the building itself. So as we said earlier, today we're focusing on the overall building design. We'll return specifically to address updates on the connectors, the public realm, and Joslin Park. The building organization, just to refresh your memories of the project, is organized with 10 floors of inpatient beds. These are 30-bed units, 2 15-bed units on 10 floors, the upper portion of the tower with mechanical spaces and fully closed above and below. The base of the building is support services, a range of patient and other amenities that will support the hospital, as well as those very critical hospital connector links at the 3rd floor to the other campuses that we'll talk to you about in a little bit. But let's refresh everyone's memory on the building concept itself. In this updated massing model of many that we're studying, we're seeking to express to the city and to the district the quality of patient care that is received at Dana-Farber, the incredible focus on family members and health and well-being for staff members. From that improved massing that was discussed from the IMP plan, the mass itself steps back through land easements from Longwood Center. We've eased the corners and the roofs to mitigate shadow impacts on the neighboring structures and parklands. We've stepped the building back at the pedestrian zones for widened sidewalks and public accommodation. And then we've started to explore the articulation of the building for its programmatic expression. We believe that these come together with intentionality to express the softness and warmth of the care that will take place in the hospital. So whether that's the organic expression or forms of the building to the veil-like qualities of the facade or almost like drapery, they find their expression in the petals that Kevin will describe to you in a moment, that are the primary components of the building facade. So with that, I'd like to ask Kevin to take us through the building in urban context and discuss the facades in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Michael. So first, I'm going to just remind everyone in terms of how the building sits in its context. This is a view of the building looking from Brookline Ave. There are 2 primary petals on this facade as well as a base. And at the corner, a 3-story space that's framing an interior garden that we're going to talk about in a little bit later. As we turn the corner and look at the view from Joslin Park, there are 2 petals that are sort of formed by a stem in the middle of the band. And we're going to go into a lot of detail today talking about sort of the fabric of the glass of the petals, as well as the other materials around the base of the building. And as we go along Pilgrim Road, the petal turns the corner and it transitions from a glass rain screen to a metal rain screen system up along the back of Longwood Center. So let's look at a little more detail, sort of at how this system works. So this is an axiometric that's sort of showing you the view from the corner of Brookline and Joslin Place. We have this glass rain screen on the 3 petals on those 3 exposures, a steel frame structurally glazed curtain wall at the base that's framing the garden that's right at the corner, and an ornamental metal cladding that's cladding the stem, and a terracotta system that sort of wraps the corner around Pilgrim Road and Brookline, as well as the gasket up along Longwood Center. We have a simpler system, a metal panel rain screen up along Longwood Center. It gently wraps the corner and is separated with a gasket with the petal on that facade. So let's show you a few views of this in its context. This is what how much you can see if you're further down the road, looking up Longwood Avenue back at the complex. You can see it just peeking above. So we wanted to give you a sense of that. Okay, so let's just talk about the elements. So they're the petals that form sort of the glass rain screen, the stem, and then the base and the lobby. And this transitions to this rendering where we have this very elegant skin that is a combination of frit glass that sort of provides a performative element, but also gives it the identity almost of a lace curtain that is over that facade. So this idea of softness on the petals and warmth in the middle of the building with the stem is really the fundamental idea. Now, as we look a little bit more, we've studied a lot some of these elements, and this just shows you the base of the stem as it transitions to the canopy at the base. You can see we're having a lot of fun of these things. I miss the old days when we were in a room and you could look at these things together, but we're going to try to show you some models. The next view is the view from Pilgrim and Deaconess looking across Joslin Park. You will notice that there are some changes on the Pilgrim connector. We're going to talk about that at another meeting, but it's much more of a building and something that's of the park. It's a very different thing. Our building itself, you'll notice that there are these slight projections on the facades that give this added texture that's almost like if you were looking at a petal under an X-ray, there would be a scalar notion to that. And so we're adding this little element of detail on the facade. And as we turn the corner, you'll see it a little bit more. So as we look at from Brookline Avenue, this is the other view. You see the definition of the petals, but more importantly, at the base of the building, we've been working a lot. And as we zoom in a little closer, you're going to see what we're beginning to talk about. We have this interior garden that's on the inside of the lobby that is looking back out to the park. So there's this wonderful element of green space inside the building and outside the building, which we're going to talk about in a little more detail when we get into the lobby. And you can see a hint of the terracotta to the left of the main entrance and this ornamental metalwork on the stem. These models are going to just show you just some studies we've done of this corner, how it transitions to the upper massing, the voluptuous shapes of the petals. And then in the next view, just a little more detail, a close-up as you look at the relationship with that corner green space and how it looks facing Joslin Park and Brookline Avenue, and really just the volumetric shapes. In this particular image on the far right, how the petal on Brookline Avenue transitions to a smaller scale canopy above the storefronts with the cafe space just above peeking out. Michael's going to go into a little more detail about the systems.
Thanks Thanks very much, Kevin. So we've worked to try and restrain the palette to a limited number of materials. So the pedal trims that you saw in some of those models are intended to be a formed metal panel with a matte or a texture coating. That the majority of the facade is a fritted rain screen glass cladding. That's a combination of vision and rain screen panel. And then we've worked since the last time you saw it to integrate and conceal the louvers into a more comprehensive composition that seeks to quiet the building down. I wanted to take a moment, though, to tell you a little bit about the typical inpatient floor plan. The intentionality of the pedal design and the overall partie is meant to express the clear functionality and the relationships of program to the exterior. So that stem that Kevin spoke about is the expression of the patient family respite areas that are their primary arrival to guests and visitors on the floor. Each of the pedals in turn enclose and hold the units, patient rooms with that subvolume in the back against Longwood Center, primarily being staff and support areas, yet still exposed to daylight, with a clear expression at the joints between the pedals of daylight at the end of every corridor for wayfinding and staff benefit. The unitized rain screen facade is really focused around the window and maximizing the amount of daylight into the patient room. So within our unitized system, where we have about a 7'6" wide by 9' high window that incorporates a seat, we've really looked to maximize the amount of daylight and views for the patients, but also to look at the frit pattern from the outside in and the inside out, using the veiling qualities of the frit pattern to ease glare and sunlight into the room, very much focused on the patient perspective of the building out. When we look at that from the inside out, we're proposing this very gentle frit. We're still in the process of reviewing this with staff and patient and family council members to look at it and refine this from both inside out and outside in. It's as you saw in some of our earlier studies, we've looked at many different patterns and variations for this, and how we can balance the expression of the building, the experience of patients and family members looking out, with adding a level of scale and softness to the building from the exterior. Our current volume in this current image here, we've settled, as Kevin said, on a very simple fade pattern that works in combination with these elements that give scale in terms of a mullion cap on the facade. We're also working to integrate the louvers very carefully into the composition. So a concealed screen works to create a harmony of composition with the major intake louvers for the mechanical systems at mid-level and roof composed within the overall facade.
So we wanted to, oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
No, go ahead, Kevin.
No, you can go through this one.
As we saw in some of the model photos, the profiles of the metal panel that enclose the pedals, they're optimized for fabrication, but they have a great variety in terms of depth and profile. So really working to ease the eye around the composition and provide dynamism as each of these forms meet the sky, as well as transformation at the base to canopies that shelter the vehicular drop-off and pedestrian areas.
So what we wanted to show you a little more detail of what's happening on the ground floor at the base of the building. So just to zoom in and show you what the lobby looks like. As I mentioned before, we have an interior garden at the corner along Brookline and Joslin Place, as well as the main lobby and reception area and the main entrance right at the drop-off. So this is really a signature piece of landscape that actually connects topographically with the street through this section. So you'll see that there's this inside-outside experience where the grading from the outside of the building, both on Joslin Place as well as Brookline Avenue, transitions up seamlessly into this interior landscape. And that there's a multi-phase meditation space on the inside of the garden looking out. And Michael's just peeling away the landscape on the park and the landscape in front of our building, just so you can see these details in a little more detail. The main entry on the left, the primary building lobby, as well as this interior garden with the interfaith space within. We'll be talking about the hospital connector at a future meeting with you. So Michael's going to go through a little bit more of the base details, then we'll be all done.
So beginning at Brookline Avenue, from the petals above, the stems are meant to be an exploration of textured and perforated metal, serving both as air to conceal air intake louvers, but also to ease the forms to the ground. Here along Brookline Avenue, we see a clear articulation of the 5,000 square foot retail area underneath the canopy that faces Brookline Avenue. And then beginning here, a pair of the bookends of the building base that's meant to be exploration of terracotta. So looking at various tonality as well as texture to enclose the service areas of the building, but also to provide filtered views to staircases and staff areas here seen at the little pocket park towards Longwood Center with a granite base that unifies the bottom of the building. As we move along here to the Joslin Park view and the main entry, there is this 10-foot grade change. So now we've sloped up to the main entry from level G to level 1. The stem forming and signaling entry into the building under the canopy, and this richly textured and varied terracotta facade that moves around the building. The granite base rises to provide an opportunity for signage, but that terracotta screen also conceals veiled glazing to patient and staff areas that are just behind on the inside, as well as some air intake louvers that are working in conjunction with the mechanical systems. Back around to Pilgrim Road on the end in this rougher progress rendering, the intention is that terracotta rain screen continues up, completes the volume of the mass. We have the corrugated metal panel on the facades above, and we continue that same rich articulated language at the pedestrian realm. This is all to say that we're still beginning to explore the subtleties and variety that we can bring to the material palette in terms of not only the frit, testing surface 1 versus surface 3, patterns and density, how they read from the outside and the inside, as well as from afar. And as Kevin said, looking at the richness and correspondence of the building palette with the neighboring community as well. So that concludes our update on the building. We'd be more than happy to go back to any of these images as we listen to your comments and feedback. Stressing again that we'll return to focus on the public realm, connectors, and Joslin Park at a future date. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Kevin. Commissioners, comments?
I can jump in. First of all, thank you. I really appreciated your presentation and how you describe the approach to the architecture of the building. I think it's a really very elegant proposal that does a lovely job of balancing kind of the practical aspects with the aesthetic aspects, particularly the transition from the stem to the canopy and the subtle variation within the materials. Although I realize we are not focusing on the connectors today, one thing I would encourage you to think about for that presentation is how you can bring the elegance and the approach to design to the building to your treatment of those connectors. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Manfredi?
I think this is really quite extraordinary. I really appreciate your storyline, but especially how you've then made that tangible, and how it relates to use and who the visitor and who the guest, who the patient is here, and the sense of a very special and embracing kind of place in all of its aspects. I think is quite a wonderful proposal. I wonder how you come to understand the facade looks so regular in your renderings, and yet you talked about all the different things that have to happen in this facade, meaning, this is a hospital. And so you have some kind of important mechanical space low in the building. You have important mechanical space on the top of the building. I wonder just how confident you are in how homogeneous that envelope will be, because that's really important. The images are beautiful. The language and the geometries I think are just wonderful. And this is not in any way critical. I'm just wondering how you get to that level of confidence that, in fact, when you put all these pieces together, and I'm thinking especially about the fritted glass and inlaying those louvers in those several different places where different things are happening that affect the exterior envelope, that you can get to this very I don't know, it almost feels like a piece of fabric. It almost feels like a piece of clothing in a very sheer sort of way, but also in a very homogeneous way. I really want the building to look like what you're showing us, and I'm sure there's a lot of mock-ups and things to come to really understand that. But it's really very beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Sorry. Thanks, David. Shauna?
Like my colleagues, I'm really impressed with the from my perspective, the voluptuousness and organic quality paired with the very clear restraint. I think that's an exceptionally beautiful combination, because there's enough to keep your eye interested and moving all the time, while at the same point there's a quietness. So a couple of questions. I know we're not talking about the public realm, but when we come back, I'm curious how the landscape, I don't know that it has to echo it and have the same character, but what is the relationship between those two? Particularly given the qualities of an indoor landscape and an outside landscape not being exactly the same. I'd also like to understand the sectional experience when you're right against the window. And again, this isn't for today.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part that we haven't really looked at today, which is the loading dock and the Pilgrim Street edge of the project. And given how much beauty, elegance, and energy is in this, of course it's going to be quiet. Of course it's not going to be the same type of thing, but how is that facade achieving the best solution it can, given this project, given the languages you're developing of the project?
Shauna, all the things, the landscape, those are great tips, and we'll make sure to, there's plenty of things to chew on the next time we present. But in terms of the loading dock, the Pilgrim facade, and actually all these areas we're talking about, there's something in the back of our mind that's been fundamental to our thinking, which is whatever we do, we want it to look somewhat effortless. And we've got all these, louvers and things and spaces that maybe need light, but they don't want to be seen. And so how do you do that? And I think in that area, we're just getting to it. But you can even see on this facade, there's like a family lounge, visitor lounge, that's sort of right next to the main entrance. It's a very private thing, but we want to get light. We want to have a sense of occupancy. But it needs to be very private. And then there's like a staff lounge that can be a little more public, but then there are louvers. So we're using this veil to sort of mask all the complexity. And on the loading dock entrance side in the garage, Michael would say, we're still working on that. You can see the recipe, but we're still working on it, And so I think we want to get that even more effortless than it is right now. But the system is working. We just have to work on some of the grammar a little bit. Wouldn't you say, Michael?
Absolutely, Kevin. And we're coming to terms as well with the technical coordination. So with BR+A, David, as you said, making sure that our louver strategy is rock solid with enough space to give us some tolerance and leeway, but also for all the things, the ground furniture that we know needs to be around the base of the building, using the granite base and these zones of solidity to collect all the devices so that there's a logic and a place for them, so that as a visitor arriving in the building or a patient, if I go back to this previous view, we can really focus, at these prime areas, a quiet, dignified passage into the building. And Shauna, I would love, as we go forward, and we will have Michael Van Valkenburg, Chris and John, our landscape architects, join us to talk in much more detail at future meetings about the intentionality of these inside-outside relationships. We are being challenged to make sure that we address all seasons. So understanding the interior garden will grow at a different pace and reflect a different season than the outside. So how can we, with intentionality, make sure that transition feels natural and not artificial?
Thank you.
I believe we have Bill on the call. Go ahead, Bill.
Yes. I've unmuted myself. I just, you can keep this rendering for us to talk off of. I've been fascinated by this project from the get-go, and I was totally fascinated by the way the bottoms of the petals open up the building at the height that normal human beings can experience it, whether you're in a car or certainly by foot. And so I found the intersection of the petals and the bridges. The bridges have become kind of integral to this, not kind of add-ons, not feeling like they're just a connector, but they're integral to the building. So I've been fascinated by that. And the one thing that worried me until today was the seeming flatness of the general elevation, and that flatness didn't have a kind of life, or someone used the firm word, voluptuousness, that this pedal system deserved. And so today, I mean, I'm still getting a sense of it, and I think it'll be interesting for you to share with us even some models of the window system and the rain screen and louvers. But today we're getting that sense that one has the texture of these two flat spaces facing Joslin are themselves wonderfully textured. And I just want to compliment the team profusely for what they've pulled off here. And I just hope that budgets or conservative reactions to the building do not carry the day, because I think right now this building contains both the crispness and the rain screen window system, but also the curvular nature of the shaping. And I just don't want people to start cutting away those things out of the project, because I think that's what's going to make this a very memorable building for the city of Boston. So please keep going in the direction you're going, and let us continue to defend it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I don't know if no. Commissioner Kim is recused. Maybe if anyone else has comments, I'm just going to chime in here and happy to hear your comments after. I think I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and just applaud the ambition of this project. I do think that you guys are really trying to design something that not only, meets the programmatic needs, but really addresses the architecture in a very meaningful and distinct way. So I think that's great. Saying that, I do have a couple of things I just want to make sure, and they're small moments, but maybe if we go back to slide 34A, I am questioning where that center petal lands. It feels like it minimizes the entrance. And I'm just wondering if that geometry, it feels to me the way this gestures, you want to have the entrance on the right-hand side of this big gesture, and programmatically you may not be able to, but this entry point feels so diminutive for this large building that I just wonder, is there any way to bring a little bit more presence to it? Because I do feel like it's signaling a different entry point, something to think about. And I know you have that program with the, family lounge or whatever you mentioned. So just throwing it out there. I am glad to see that you're really, working hard on models and making sure all the dimensions are right. That trim around the beautiful glass, double glazed wall could get chunky. And so I think continue to explore that and study that till the proportions feel absolutely right. It and I'm just saying that as I know you all are so good at this and will continue to study it, but is it more about curving planes, or is it really, does it have some three-dimensionality that I'm just curious how that resolves itself? And I curious about this window wall, the glass wall with the frit as an, somebody who's always obsessed about the inside outside experience. Is that frit going to be comfortable? So I'm glad to see those studies that you have of where, you want vision glass or where you want good views. That's a really important aspect to the success of this wall. And just thinking about this at night, what is it going to look like? What are we going to actually see? I have a feeling that we'll see a lot of, rectangular windows where patients have their lights on. And so I just, that reality I think is okay, but I just think it's worth seeing what that would look like in a night rendering.
Mimi, there's a little surprise there at night, but it's going to have to wait till the next meeting.
Oh, okay.
Right? But it has to do with the individual rooms and what you'll see from outside. But it's not all here yet, but you'll see it the next time.
Awesome. And then the last thing I'll just say is, I know this is going to be a fantastic wall, I have no doubt, but I am unsure about what's happening behind. And I know you showed us that perspective where we only see a little bit from the public realm, but I still think you have neighbors that will be looking at this wall. And so if you could just bring like an elevation so we understand that, or maybe you want to just show it again here so we can see. I don't understand the adjacency of the neighboring buildings as well as you obviously do.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about, in terms of distance? What are we talking in terms of, how much can we see from an elevation rather than a perspective?
Sure. So there's about 30 feet minimum between Longwood Center and the Future Cancer Hospital that we've mapped out to preserve views not only from some of the research labs that exist on the upper floors of Longwood Center to make sure they receive daylight and views, but also on this facade we see a number of elements. I'll point them out. So there's elevator banks, so patient and service elevators are receiving borrowed daylight through here, and there's a number of staff areas, staff lounges, some office areas, as well as additional corridors. The daylight to this joint between the two buildings, looking out towards the riverway. So the building massing is it's about 60 feet above, 67 feet above the Longwood Center on the Longwood Street side, but we can come back with some views that show the impacts of the building from a distance.
I think that would be
Just wanted
great.
to
Mhm.
add
Yep.
one small comment to Mimi's comments about the entry, because I love the composition you're working with. I'm wondering if playing with the eyebrow slightly might be a way to address it, where the eyebrow comes down so low, just not as much as on the right hand side, but and that's something you can look at as, or maybe have already. And then that I also just I love and applaud the ambition of apparent effortlessness.
While we're here, is there any, obviously you have conviction where the entrance is, but is there any thought about moving it over to the more gestural side? Why do, maybe just
Well,
share your thoughts?
Yeah.
there are a couple things, Mimi. One of them's technical, which is the grading is killer. Like
Right.
Yeah.
we moved it as close as we could get to the corner to actually get the grading to even work. So that's one thing. But I feel the scale also, just let's just suspend disbelief and even say we could move it over. You know, the scale is so much bigger on the right side of the stem and the left, and that's still like it's well over 20 feet tall. I mean, the scale is very deceiving. So that's a very tall vestibule and entry, and so and our lobby is actually quite small. So making it even smaller would bring compression to all those functions, and so, but it's mostly the grading. And that we can't slide it down. We slid it. I mean, we actually, since the last time we presented it down, Michael, how far did we slide it?
Yeah, so we pulled it to the east by about 10 feet to bring it closer to mid block and compositionally, and there's a balance between where the stem lands, and there's also an observation unit that is above that we're trying to maintain windows through. So there's a tension both from the left and the right.
Yeah.
Both of those.
I mean, you know, and maybe the entrance is perfectly sited, or not, I'm not arguing that. Stem just feels like it's facing towards, you know, the street, and it's putting its back to the entrance. So it could even be the sculpting or the shaping of the stem as it hits the ground, just to be a little bit more directional. But it's my
Fair point.
Any additional thoughts? If not, we could see if there are any public comments.
So at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute to public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioner Love, I don't see any comments.
Great. So maybe I'm going to call out what I heard, and commissioners add any if I've missed them. But one is, it seems you're going to come back and explain more about the envelope and answer David's comments about, you know, the confidence you have in it, and how it stays homogeneous, but yet addresses program and that night view. I think we heard a couple of comments about the connectors, how, you know, some of the gestures that we're seeing in this building, how they relate to the connectors. Where does that language start and stop, I think was a theme that I heard. We talked about the loading dock, that elevation still needs a little bit more consideration. I think you even admitted that. So it would be nice to see the next time what you're thinking along that facade. You're going to come back with the landscape, the in and out. That's assume that's a whole separate meeting anyway. And then 2 more comments. We talked about the entrance. If there's anything that you want to bring back, we'd be happy to see that, and more information on the rear elevation.
Okay. that makes sense.
It does.
We'll be happy, to bring clarity on all those
Yeah.
items next time.
Yeah, and maybe just one comment about the rear elevation. If it really doesn't have any impact, except for its neighbors, does it really need to be a full glass wall? Do you want to think about more simpler strategies? I'm just throwing that out, like why, those continuous curtain walls, is it programmatic that's driving it? Or is it just a real design choice that
I think we can show you, like, we tried some actually simpler systems horizontally and things like that, Mimi, but we felt like it wasn't in the character of the whole building per se. And we said, okay, it's not the same as the other facade, but it needs to be as simple as the other facades. But we can show you
Totally get it.
sort of that, but
Sure.
All right.
So Mimi, I think we are done here with the comments, and we'll be back with the team for another subcommittee. So really thank you for your presentation tonight. And I believe this includes our meeting tonight. Lizzie, did I miss anything? Did I do a good job? Okay.
Yeah, I think you covered everything.
Yeah, 4 minutes under, so that's great.
okay.
I was
All right.
worried
Yeah.
with that first project.
I know, me too.
Well, thank you,
All
everyone.
right.
Thank you
Well,
very
thank
much.
Have a good
everybody.
evening.
Yeah.
All
Good
right.
night,
Thank you,
everybody,
Dan.
everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Lizzie. Thank you, Diana.
Bye.